are listening to the Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
The Greenville Post has a piece entitled A New Strategic Treaty, Vietnam Next. There is a long and interesting history between the Soviet Union, or Russia, and North Korea. Kim Jong-un released a statement saying that the president of the Russian Federation, Comrade Vladimir Putin, and I have just signed the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Russian Federation, which will forever shine in the history of the development of friendly relations between the two. This is a very important event. How important is it? Well, for insight, let's turn to our next guest. He holds the John J. and Rebecca Moores Chair of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. He's one of the most prolific writers of our time. In fact, his recent books are, I dare say, A Gerald Horne Reader and Acknowledging Radical Histories. And his most recent book is entitled
Armed Struggle, Panthers and Communists, Black Nationalists and Liberals in Southern California through the 60s and 70s.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
Relations between our two countries have reached a new high level of allied relations. The legal basis has been laid for the implementation of the grandiose vision of the two countries, leaders, and the centuries-old aspirations of our peoples to reliably protect peace and security in the region and in the world, and to build strong states in accordance with the common interest of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Russian Federation. Again, that's another part of the statement by Kim Jong-un. Reliably protect peace and security. That is very consistent language, whether you're listening to Kim, whether you're listening to Putin, whether you're listening to Xi. This is the theme, the common thread that runs throughout not only a lot of what they say, but a hell of a lot of what they're doing. Dr. Gerald Horne.
Well, I should also add that this important and profound agreement between the DPRK and the Russian Federation is a stunning defeat for Tokyo. Recall that Japan has been lobbying Moscow incessantly for decades for the return of the Kuril Islands, which Russia occupied in the wake of Japan's defeat in 1945. You even had the spectacle of a Japanese prime minister spending quality time in Sochi at the time of the Winter Olympics, at a moment when its close U.S. ally was boycotting that important event. And now you see that Japan is staggered by the prospect that North Korea, which specializes in sending missiles into Japanese airspace, now has a formidable ally in the form of Moscow. And of course, this strengthens DPRK, which has a bone to pick with Tokyo, going back to the brutal occupation of the Korean Peninsula by Japan beginning in 1910. The fact that Japan is now the third largest military spender on planet Earth behind the United States and China is not consoling to the DPRK, and no doubt motivated this recent embrace of Moscow. It's also a staggering defeat for the Republic of Korea. Speaking of South Korea, South Korea, believe it or not, has been a major supplier to Ukraine in its conflict with Russia. And now you see that, in a sense, Russia has struck back and has strengthened its antagonist, speaking of the DPRK, whose relations with the Republic of Korea have headed south in recent months and recent weeks, marked by the so-called dung balloons, that is to say, the DPRK sending balloons with feces across the demilitarized zone into the south. And now you see that the DPRK is strengthened at a time when it has sworn out fundamentally any idea of reconciliation with the South. And above all, it is a strategic defeat for U.S. imperialism, in the sense that Russia now is strengthened diplomatically, perhaps even militarily, as a result of this pact with the DPRK, which specializes in producing artillery shells and has been supplying said shells to Moscow for some time. It's also a failure of the entire Cold War era, perpetrated and driven by U.S. imperialism. That is to say that somehow Washington did not realize, I guess they did not study diplomatic history or political geography, that Russia, the largest country by territory on planet Earth, has been designed to play a major role in world politics, be they be led by communists in Moscow or non-communists in Moscow. And so we now see the validation of that particular thesis, because we see that Moscow is resurrected, to use the term of a recent book by a well-known U.S. scholar. And it's also confirming the fact that Russia has been bound, as a result of geography, to be a major player on the richest continent, speaking of Europe, not least because it's the most populous nation in Europe, 150 million, versus Germany, number 2, 82 million, not to mention being the major source in Europe for oil, natural gas, and all manner of natural resources. And so the Cold War was a failure, but it was bound to be a failure because of a failure to acknowledge geography and history. And now geography and history have come back with a vengeance, with the strengthening of Russia as a result of this pact with North Korea. Not only that, but when U.S. imperialism forced the breakup of the Soviet Union, to a certain degree, as they say in London, that was an own goal. That is to say, Washington scored a goal for Moscow, because theretofore, Moscow had been subsidizing Armenia and Moldova and Central Asia and the other constituent republics of the Soviet Union. But with the breakup, those subsidies could cease, and that capital, that money, could then remain in Russia, allowing Russia to be strengthened, not to mention giving it more diplomatic flexibility, for example, and not necessarily having to cater or pander to the diplomatic prerogatives of small states like Armenia, for example. And so we see that you have in the making a kind of de facto alliance between Russia, the DPRK, the People's Republic of China, Vietnam, which Mr. Putin is visiting as we speak. And that, in a sense, is a recreation of the kind of alliance that the Cold War was designed to prevent. And so we see as a result that Cuba will be strengthened as a result of this North Korea-Russian alliance, as Cuba is an ally of both, not to mention an ally of Vietnam and China. Indirectly, this will strengthen other U.S. antagonists like Venezuela and Nicaragua. It will also strengthen what is left of President Macron's idea of constructing a European strategic autonomy, because obviously this tailing after U.S. imperialism by the European Union has once again failed in a spectacular manner. It's dragging the Europeans into all manner of conflicts designed to benefit U.S. imperialism, with Ukraine being Exhibit A in this regard. And at the same time, it's allowing the hard right in Europe, as represented by the recent European parliamentary elections, to pose as apostles of peace, because many of them are hostile to the Ukraine war, and therefore is weakening those like Chancellor Scholz in Berlin, President Macron in Paris. It's also strengthening anti-imperialist forces in Southern Africa. Note that Zimbabwe, sanctioned by the United States and its allies, has been a close historic ally of the DPRK. And note that just a few days ago, President Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe was in St. Petersburg for the International Economic Forum and was captured on a hot mic speaking to President Putin about his neighbor, that is to say Zambia, and how it's playing a malign and malignant role. And that will lead, I'm afraid to say, to the further isolation of Zambia. So, once again, this is an important pact. It's a profound pact. It's bound to shake up this small planet to the detriment of U.S. imperialism.
Dr. Horne, we reported here this week that Hezbollah flew a drone over a number of sensitive areas in Israel, demonstrating that they could target those areas. We also reported that the spokesman for the U.S. military, for the Freudian slip, the Israeli military said that that they could not defeat Hamas. The Israeli leadership is threatening to attack Lebanon and go toe-to-toe with Hezbollah, which does not sound like a good idea. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that the Israeli authorities are full of bluster. The last thing they should want to do is tangle with Hezbollah, which has thousands of missiles, tens of thousands of well-trained militants who fought the Israelis to a standstill in 2006 and are determined, as Mr. Nasrallah said in his speech yesterday, to approach any further aggression with Israel without handcuffs, without any rules. And in fact, if I were in Cyprus now, I would be heading for the hills, because Mr. Nasrallah also suggested that if Cyprus cooperates with Israel in an attack on Lebanon, they will be in the crosshairs. This could lead to a wider conflict, since that Mediterranean island is now occupied by the Turks in the north, a NATO member, occupied by the Greeks otherwise, or Greek Cypriots, I should say. And we also know that the Turks are not necessarily warm and fuzzy when it comes to Israel. They've broken off import and export relations with Israel, which is a further blow to the Israeli economy. It's collapsing in the south because of the war with Hamas. It's collapsing in the north because of the impending conflict with Hezbollah. The tech sector is collapsing. It's next to impossible to get a doctor's appointment because those with fungible skills are fleeing to Europe and even to Brooklyn. The Zionist lobby in the United States is suffering all manner of blows because of their thuggery at UCLA, breaking up a peaceful encampment on April 30th. They suffered a political defeat when they were unable to defeat Congressional Black Caucus member Summer Lee of Western Pennsylvania. June 25th, they may suffer another defeat when their antagonist, Jamal Bowman of the CBC of Bronx Westchester, may, and I underline may, emerge triumphant in the face of a challenge by a Zionist lobby-backed challenger. Yet we see that despite one staggering blow after another, Prime Minister Netanyahu is basically kicking sand in the face of President Biden, saying that Mr. Biden has halted important military materiel, which is interrupting the genocidal conflict in Palestine. He is coming to Washington in the face of an International Criminal Court warrant. He's basically courting danger. It would not be surprising me if that warrant is issued by the end of July when he arrives, if there's not an attempt to effectuate some kind of citizen's arrest against Mr. Netanyahu. And at the same time, if the Zionist lobby is paying attention, they should be quite concerned by this resurgence of Christian nationalism, which they see as an ally, but ultimately it's the kind of ally by which a rope supports a hanging man, because we all know about the historic antagonistic relations between Christian nationalists and, I'm afraid to say, the Jewish community. Indeed, you do not have to be a historian to understand and recognize that the Anglosphere surged to preeminence because they were able to effectuate an entente with the Jewish diaspora, then being hounded by the then leading power, speaking of the Spanish. But now as U.S. imperialism is in decline, it's not surprising to see Zionism in Israel in decline as well.
Dr. Gerald Horne, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly, greatly appreciate that analysis, and we look forward to having you back.
Thank you.